Hi everyone, my name is Joanne Shango. I am the head of school at the Montessori School Rochester. I have been a Montessori guide and teacher, administrator, consultant, speaker, trainer, not trainer, I'm not a Montessori trainer. However, I have done continuing education programs and workshops for Montessori, as well as guiding or teaching in classrooms, in infants, toddlers, primary, which is preschool through kindergarten. I've worked with elementary, and I'm actually trained through high school through adolescence. I have had a long career that spans about 28 years in Montessori education, and I'm here with you both as a Montessori guide as well as a parent as we continue to navigate through this pandemic that we are all experiencing and the stay-at-home orders that have effectively closed schools, at least here in the United States, through the end of the school year. And for many of you on the other side of the globe, at least through a current term or semester, many of you have begun opening. We are looking at revisiting how we are going to reopen for our summer camp programs. We're very excited about the summer camp that we're going to be offering, which is primarily outdoors. It's our STEAM into summer. We met with our licensing consultant yesterday, and it was very exciting to review all of the regulations that we've always lived up to, as well as any new regulations, so that we can be better prepared to safely and comfortably open up for summer camp for our wonderful students and to welcome new campers to our campus, as well as to provide support for our families. So I've been doing that as an administrator, but I'm also a parent, and I've been parenting my children through these stay-at-home orders. I've referred to many different circumstances that we've been experiencing in my own home or in the homes of friends or family members of mine, as we provide tools for you in parenting through this crisis and providing your children with the most authentic and positive home life experience as you support them, in particular through distance learning. It is complex, and real life is happening at the same time, and it's quite a juggle. Today I thought I would address actual tools. We've talked about theories, and I've given a few tools in regards to what you can implement in your home and setting boundaries and positive parenting, how to communicate with your children. However, tools really help, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about positive discipline. And positive discipline, when we think about the tools needed, those tools have more to do with yourself as a parent than they do with the child. The child is going to respond to the tools that you use. And it's really difficult to reset the way we've been parenting and how we've been approaching discipline with our children. What do you do when you remove time out? What do you do? How do you go about removing yelling from your communication strategies? How do you create a new temperament in which to communicate with your children in the most frustrating of times? What do we do for ourselves? I remember years ago, my daughter was young. She was about 3. It was her first preschool experience. She was at a Montessori school that was about 25 minutes from our home here in Rochester Hills. And we were going to a photo shoot. We were doing, actually, it was not family photos, it was just photos of my 2 children. We were going to the neighboring, I totally forgot what it's called, but over at Oakland University on their campus, we were taking photos on their beautiful landscaping with a photographer. And the photographer was really great, and my children looked adorable. They were all dressed up, and we had a short window of time before I had to get my daughter to school. Well, during that time, my daughter did something that my nephew had done a few years prior at my wedding, which was, rather than posing for photos, he had a camera and he was emulating, copying, trying to be the photographer. And at my wedding, I thought it was the most adorable thing in the world. as we were on a time constraint with my daughter, trying to get the photos done and then getting her over to school, she was not cooperating with the photographer. She kept wanting to be on the same side as the photographer rather than posing for pictures. And she was communicating delightfully, and the photographer was getting flustered. She was a really great photographer. She had a lot of patience, but you could tell she was getting flustered. She couldn't get my daughter into the shots because my daughter kept coming over to collaborate with her. What if we take the picture over here? What if we do this? What if we do that? And so the photos were taking a really long time. When we got them back, they were absolutely gorgeous. That being said, as a parent, I was concerned about the photographer. She was getting flustered. I knew she was really, really talented, and my daughter wasn't cooperating. So by the time we got our photos done and we got in the car, my poor little 3-year-old, I was like, honey, why weren't you cooperating with the photographer? She was trying to get photos done and you were trying to be the photographer, but today you weren't the photographer, blah, 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 blah. And that's probably what it sounded like to my daughter. And it took us about 6 minutes to get to school, and I know that I went on for those 6 minutes. And when I dropped her off at school, I kind of looked back. And I think I even got some photos from the photographer that were really adorable. And I thought, oh, okay, she somehow managed to get some great photos, which of course I didn't doubt, except that my daughter wasn't posing for them. So I began thinking about my communication with my daughter, and I thought, what's going on with me? Why was I so frustrated and so impatient? I know that she's only 3. I know that she was observing and trying to practice the art of being a photographer. That was what she was doing. She thought it was fascinating. She also thought that she was being helpful, and it was our communication that was somehow failing. We somehow weren't acknowledging her need while expressing our need, all of that. But what I was really most frustrated about as I looked back on the 6-minute car ride, maybe 5 minutes, to get her to her school, was my communication. And so I'm not a yeller. It happens very rarely, but for me, I felt like I was yelling in the car. Was I screaming at the top of my lungs or using language that I shouldn't have? No. But I was definitely in that mode of you can't and no and no and you can't. And it made me uncomfortable. And if it made me uncomfortable, I can only think of how it made my daughter feel. I know that she looked sad, but I was only trying to help her. I love her. She was taking such good pictures and I wanted to help her, and I wasn't listening to that communication. So I created a tool for myself. Even though I'm not a massive yeller, I mentioned to you before that even if my children are up the stairs in their bedrooms, I'll call out their name, but I will wait for them to come out of their room so that we can speak face to face, so that I don't have to raise my voice in anger or not. Usually it's not, it's just calling them to dinner. However, I'm always looking for that communication, and I would say 95% of the time that's how I communicate with them at home. But I wanted to be more conscious. And so I set into place a no yelling rule. And it was very funny. I held myself accountable on Facebook, on my personal page, and the first day I wrote no yelling rule, day 1. No yelling, day 1. And I was holding myself accountable every day. I would talk about the situations that challenged me. I would discuss the days that were great, and I would honestly discuss the days that I had to restart. And so I would get to day 27 or day 36 or day 112. But if I yelled, I described it, I explained it, I talked about how long it lasted, which was usually in about 30 or 40 seconds, because I had become so conscious. I'd become so conscious of the tone of my voice and of my communication that even for those 30 or 40 seconds that I ended up raising my voice, yelled, whatever my version of yelling is, and I held myself accountable. I discussed the situation on my Facebook page. I explained how I felt afterwards. I explained how I discussed it with my children. And then I started the next day at day one again. This went on for years. And it was really important. And people would write to me and say, how? How are you not yelling? And I kept trying to explain as diligently and clearly as I could that it wasn't that I wasn't disciplining. It wasn't that there weren't situations that were frustrating. It wasn't that my children weren't receiving consequences. It was positives on all of those. I was frustrated at times. I was disciplining. They were receiving consequences. What they weren't doing was listening to me with a voice that had anger in it, whether it was a low, quiet voice or a shouting yell. One way or the other, it is yelling. Yelling is not just the sound of your voice as it comes out loudly. It is communicating when you're angry or frustrated versus having control of your emotions even while frustrated or angered by a situation. So by holding myself accountable, the few times in those years that I did actually raise my voice or express myself in an extreme emotion, I caught myself almost immediately. And what I found was I developed a very large network of family and friends that were encouraging me and reminding me that I wasn't defined by those moments and that I can continue going on. At one point, I stopped writing No Yelling Day 119, and instead it just said day 119 or day 137 or some ridiculous number like that, which I really did get to. And somebody sent me a private message and said, are you a recovering alcoholic? I was like, I'll go back into my post. Probably a few weeks or months ago, it would have stated No Yelling Day. And I said, it's really about holding myself accountable to not yelling. And we had a good laugh about that. And then there was some collaborative back and forth coaching on how we go about doing that. So this is, for me, I think one of the best tools I can offer to you. I'm not saying that you have to hold yourself accountable publicly. For me, that worked. That was very important for me. And it made for a great yearbook at the end of each year because I print out through a program on my Facebook called, My Social Book. And it's really awesome to see the progress of our lives as it's printed out and all of the great stories and different situations that we've been through, and my children love that. However, it was the idea of holding myself accountable and knowing that I couldn't cheat. I was making a statement to the world that this was really important to me. I'm not recommending that that's what you do. It does not have to be that public. That's just what worked for me. But find that person in your life that you can hold yourself accountable to and have those discussions with, or those text messages with, that say, I made it through a day. It was really tough, this specific, situation with this child or that child was really, really challenging. It was tough. I actually went down to the basement. I hid there for a few minutes and then came back and was better able, or to be able to discuss the times where you failed and you did communicate in that higher, more extreme emotional state, and be honest about it. That's what holds you accountable. If we're going to pretend that it wasn't so bad, then you'll find yourself slipping more and more. Sometimes when I would restart my accountability on my Facebook page, it wasn't that I ever got to the point of yelling. It was that I was feeling myself becoming more and more tense. And I would realize it had probably been months since I'd been holding myself accountable publicly. And so I would begin it again. Publicly, because I felt inside of myself more of a tenseness than I was feeling when I was holding myself accountable. By holding myself accountable, I was a lot more diligent on positive discipline strategies and the tone of my voice and communication, and my children react to that. The first 10 days of holding myself accountable, of consciously deciding that I was not going to communicate in extreme emotions was so difficult, and it will be so difficult for you because the children are used to their actions causing a response in you, and they're going to challenge you a little bit. Those first 10 days were so tough. It almost felt nonstop, like my body was the chalkboard and somebody was raking their fingernails across the chalkboard to make that horrible sound that everybody wants to escape from. It was really, really challenging. But after about 10 days, the children started responding to my communication, to my more mild, slow, deliberate communication to frustrating situations. And we watched the tempo and the measure of the class, of our home. Sorry, we were not in the classroom, this was at home. We watched how things shifted, and it became a more peaceful environment as I communicated in a more peaceful way, in a quieter, gentler, softer tone as I'm using right now. The children began responding to that more. Again, it's not that we didn't have conflict, it's how we were handling the conflicts, how we were handling frustrating situations. And I realized that my mood, my direction, my communication was the guiding component on the responses or the reception of my children in my redirection. And it really did change and evolve our household into more of a peaceful household. I have an aunt that always says, "Oh, you do yell." And I was like, I don't know why you keep saying that. It's really, really, truly very, very rare. And again, when I'm thinking of yelling, I'm thinking of that loud voice and that shouting, and the kids don't hear anything except wah, 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 wah. And then one day she was at my home, and I gave redirection to my children, and I was very firm. It's like, this is what we're doing, blah, 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 whatever it was. I don't recall what the situation was. And she said, "And you say you don't yell." And I said, "Is that what you call yelling?" She's like, "Well, I mean, you were definitely reprimanding them." And I said, as parents, there are definitely times where we're going to have to reprimand. It is our responsibility to give redirection to our children. They're on a journey of learning. They are learning how to communicate. They're learning how to navigate their wants versus other people's wants, their needs versus other people's needs. They are navigating how to share, how to take turns. This is a learning journey, and they're going to continue on this journey throughout life. And as their parents, when they're young, it is our responsibility to provide that feedback and to offer boundaries, and sometimes to let them know that there isn't a choice within the boundary or the subject matter, whatever situation it is. And she's like, "Oh, like that's called parenting." But how you communicate it, whether it's in anger or it's in frustration, or if it's always with a loud voice that they're not actually listening to, if it's always in punishment and control from the adult, that's that negative turn to it that only controls certain situations or stops situations with that stop sign, versus a learning process so that the children grow into themselves based on the experiences and the mistakes that they have made. That's the really, if I'm going to give you a tool, that's one of the most important tools that I would recommend, is holding yourself accountable in some way and changing your communication strategies with your children. The second thing that I just referenced is the idea of stop signs and no's. And throughout my career, I was very opposed to using stop sign type language in a Montessori classroom. Very opposed to it. In recent years, I've worked with somebody and she said, "Well, there are nevers. There are never situations." And I thought, okay. And it was very opposed to everything I'd always believed in, but this was somebody I really trusted. And so I started to listen to that, and I found myself again getting more tense and trying to control more situations versus guiding. And again, when I removed those from my vocabulary, when I said, actually, I don't think that there's a never. I don't believe that we have to say never or no or anything, those stop signs in our communication. about 25 years ago, I was in the classroom. I was the lead guide, and my assistant was a woman that was, well, probably my age now. And she had older children, and she kept challenging the idea of there are times where you have to say no, that you have to throw out the stop sign. And every day she would give me different circumstances. And I remember one in particular where she said, because she wanted to be able to prove that there was times where you would say no. And I believe that we're always looking for the yield, the direction, and the redirectioning. So taking out no type phrases is one of the most effective strategies for children to be receptive to the redirection. When you say no, they immediately stop listening and they're thinking, how can I do it anyways? Whether that's a conscious thought or not, as they get older, it becomes conscious. How could I do it without getting caught, right? In that situation, 25 years ago, she said, okay, our school was right in downtown Ann Arbor off of Ashley Street. And she said, what if one of the students went to run across the street and a car was coming? You would have to shout no then, right? And I said, I would shout danger. She's like, oh, is there always an alternative word? I said, yes, there's always an alternative word. Saying no means to a child that I'm trying to control them, and I'm not giving them any explanation that resonates within them of why they can't. They're thinking that they've made a reasonable choice. They've seen something, they want to do it. They've made a snap decision, whether it's conscious or not, that this is what they should do. And they want to go and do it. And when you say no, they're saying, why are you stopping me? I've already figured it out, right? I've had debates with children all the time. Like, you could fall off of that, but I won't fall, see? And they're showing me all of the reasons why what they are doing is the right choice, and me telling them no is not. And so using a word like danger will effectively stop them, but it will stop them in the appropriate manner. They're looking and saying, I don't want to be in danger. And even if it's for that split second to where they stop to look and say, why would there be danger, is usually enough to prohibit that decision, or at least prompt a communication. So a child that's running across the street and you say, no, don't run in the street, and they're like, it's okay, I've got it, I just am going to get the ball. And if you say danger, they're going to stop and look. Say, what's the danger? And they're going to reassess the situation. It's a prompting word that allows for redirection and for them to be a part of it. Even in a split-second decision, it actually becomes a more effective tool because it is not only positive, but it puts them in partnership in the situation and personally connects them to the situation instead of putting them in opposition to somebody that's going to try to stop them from doing something. And so removing those no's or those stop signs is really very important. I remember being engaged in a situation, then we were talking to our licensing consultant about it, and she's like, never ever get into opposition, right? Like the minute you get into no yes with a child, you're in a tunnel, and it's a dead end zone, and nobody is really going to come the winner, and the child isn't going to have learned or grown from that situation, and it's going to compromise everything you're actually trying to do. So to be able to find the positive language that leads a child to a more successful choice or decision is always most effective. So I was telling her about a story of a little boy, and I just referenced it, and he was on a chair, and he really wanted to be on these chairs, but this was really wobbly, and he wasn't doing anything with the chair. Sometimes a child might climb on a chair to put it up against a wall to reach something, kind of the way they might use a step stool. He was really just dancing on the chair. And so I came over and said, I made all of the unsuccessful choices, and he climbed down from there. Simply, I should have stated, chairs are for standing. Chairs are for sitting. We stand on the floor. Would you like a step stool? What are you trying to do? I should have asked all of those questions. Those are all the positive, directional questions. Instead, I said, honey, when you stand on a chair, it's dangerous. And he said, it's not dangerous. I have really good balance. And I said, but you could fall off of the chair. If your body wiggles, you might lose control of your body. He's like, no, see? And he's dancing around. And I'm explaining the situation to her. And she's like, so what'd you do? I'm like, look, if the chair wiggled too much, And she's like, and what was the result? I'm like, the result was a 15-minute conversation that finally ended with, would you like to climb down by yourself, or would you like to hold my hand and do it? And she's like, yeah, it doesn't work when we're in conflict, when it's a back and forth. I'm right, you're right, I'm right, you're right. We're raising independent, confident little children, and it's really hard, you're really hard pressed to convince them in simply a yes, no, stop sign kind of conversation that they should follow what you're doing. If I had said just quite simply, chairs are for standing. I mean, chairs are, I keep saying that, and chairs are not for standing. Chairs are for sitting, and we stand on the floor. He would have been more apt to consider that statement versus his ability to stand on the chair without falling, because what he felt was I was questioning that ability, and he was going to prove to me that I was indeed wrong and he was indeed right, that he had the balance, and he was right. I could have shaken that chair all day long. He could have danced on it. He was not going to fall off of that chair because he was in a battle of wills with me, and he was going to prove that he was successful, and he was successful. He has great balance. He's a really strong little boy. He could climb, he can jump, he climbs at the top of structures in our playground, and I was in a battle of yes, no, instead of in a reasonable conversation that simply stated a fact, which is chairs are for sitting. And then I could have gone into a discussion of what his goal was. And if his goal was simply climbing, I could have said, would you like to go outside? And it could have been all yes statements that actually led him to a goal, instead of a battle of wills with a no statement on my part. And I was using a no statement, and it was unsuccessful. He never got hurt. We got down. We were buddies. We went to group meeting. We sang songs. Everything was great. But we were in a battle of wills that was unnecessary and didn't actually lead to a learning or growing inside of himself, or even in a trust, in the next level of building trust. We still had a great relationship, but there had been an opportunity there for him to feel like I was listening to his needs instead of trying to force him with a no for him to listen to my need. It was my need that he didn't stand on the chair, is how I expressed it, instead of a factual environmental fact that we simply do not stand on chairs. And so I created conflict, which caused an escalation of, for us, it was just a debate, but it was unnecessary. And when I did switch gears and say, what is it you actually need? He says, to reach the window, and I couldn't with the chair, so then I started dancing on the chair, and he's explaining all of this after the tail end of it. I said, oh, do you know where the step stool is? I couldn't find it. I'm like, there's a second one. We have another step stool. You could have used that. That would be safe for next time. He's like, okay. And he was great. But we were in conflict. We were engaged in a battle of wills. No yelling. There wasn't anything like that. But it was still an engagement of a battle of wills, just like in that situation with the guide, as she was the assistant guide, when she was asking me about times where we might say no and use the idea of running into the street. It is more successful to discuss what's really going on instead of engaging in a battle of wills. Children are always, I would say always, 99% of the time, particularly when you've been fostering this trust and communication, more readily able and willing to have a discussion or a rationality about safety versus a resistance to stop signs. So finding the facts, we don't stand on chairs, or danger when you run into a street. Actually, I'm going to rephrase that. We don't stand on chairs. That's what I kept trying to express to him. But what I was trying to say was we sit in chairs and we stand on the floor. Or it's danger to go into a street. They're able to relate it more to themselves. He's going to respect the community. He's definitely going to want to keep himself safe versus having conflict with an adult when they're trying to control them without, in the child's opinion, the respect or understanding of what the child's needs and wants are. Okay, so those are my 2 tools for today. I hope they made sense to you, and they really work for me. I love holding myself accountable for anything. I am one of those people. I need to know that the trainer is at the gym, or that I'm paying for a membership in order to go versus just working out. Likewise, putting into place the accountability rules so that I could change my form of communication into a more positive communication without the extreme emotions really was beneficial to me. And you'll make it 10 days, you might have to restart, you might make it 112 days, and then you'll have to restart, but it's always worth the restarting because it was 10 days more than you'd had before. It was 127 days more than you had before. And just know you have to get through those first 10 days because they're really, really tough. Changing your language into positive redirection, removing stop sign type words, the words that say I'm in control and I'm saying no, is going to be a pivotal component in getting towards that type of positive redirection and communication. It's going to open up that communication, and that tool with holding yourself accountability to the tone of your voice will make a huge difference in your household and your communications with your children and the more peaceful and purposeful direction of development for your children. That's all I have for today. Thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again in a couple of days on Friday. If you have any particular questions or topics that you would like me to explore or discuss, feel free to send me an email at joanne.shango@themsr.net, or you can leave something in the comments here or send a private message through our Facebook page with any topics that you would like to have explored. Thank you all very much. Stay well, stay healthy, stay safe. We miss you and we love you, and we look forward to having you and everyone you know joining us for a great outdoor summer camp steaming into summer. Goodbye, everybody.